Welcome to the HistoryNetwork.org podcast. Today's show is brought to you by Harrys.com. Please visit Harrys.com and use the promo code HISTORY to save $5 off your first purchase. Season 18, Episode 1, Caen, 1944. The bombing of and the battle for Caen was just part of the overall bombing of and battle for Normandy. The bombing of Normandy devastated and flattened many Normandy towns and cities and resulted in thousands of friendly civilian casualties. US General Omar Bradley remarked after the war that "We went into France almost totally untrained in air-ground cooperation." And in his book D-Day, Antony Beevor surmises that the British bombing of Caen, beginning on D-Day in particular, was stupid, counterproductive, and above all, very close to a war crime. Others have attacked Beevor's comments back in 2009, but it's fair to say that the residents of Caen, who call it home today, do refer to it as a city martyred for peace, and in some quarters feelings of anger and despair against the Allies run high to this day. Montgomery had wanted Caen taken for the Allies on D-Day in one swift push, but it would take a further 2 months at a cost of 50,000 troops before Caen would safely be in Allied hands. On June 6, 1944, Operation Neptune, the Normandy landings, part of Operation Overlord, was a success, but Caen could not be taken, as had been part of Operation Neptune's plan. It had been the assigned task of the British 3rd Infantry Division, as part of their taking of Sword Beach on D-Day, to push forward from there and secure Caen for the Allies. They would be assisted by the British 6th Airborne Division and the 1st Canadian Parachute Battalion. The airborne forces managed to capture key artillery positions and bridges during the night of the 6th of June, which effectively stopped any chance the enemy had of mounting counterattacks against the beaches from the east. However, as the British 3rd Infantry Division pushed on from Sword Beach, the German 21st Panzer Division put up a very stiff resistance, including several counterattacks, which saw the Allies halted at around 3.5 miles from their objective, and as night fell, Caen remained under German control. Caen was a strategic hub to whoever held control of it. The Allies knew that taking Caen would vastly restrict the enemy's ability to respond rapidly to Allied advances as they progressed, naturally making those advances easier to accomplish and enabling a momentum to be kept. Also, being able to advance and feed troops through this area was seen as an easier option than to advance through the relatively more difficult brocage or hedgerow country to the west of Caen. Indeed, Caen was seen as so important to the Allied plans that it would become the focus of a number of operations running throughout the next 2 months. There were no less than 9 operations to bring about the taking of Caen for the Allies. Operation Perch was the second attempt to capture Caen after Sword Beach's efforts had stalled. Montgomery, commander of all ground troops, ordered that Caen be taken by a pincer movement. From the 9th of June, 30 Corps spent the following few days trying to control the town of Tilly-sur-Seulles, defended by the Panzer-Lehr Division and elements of the 12th SS Panzer Division, and with 1st Corps being delayed from reaching their position, their attack was rescheduled for the 12th of June. When the 51st Highland Division launched its attack, the 21st Panzer Division put up stiff resistance, and by the 13th of June, the offensive east of Caen was called off. Operation Perch was followed by Operations Martlet, Epsom, Windsor, and then Charnwood. Preceding Operation Charnwood, a huge wave of Allied bombing was brought to bear on the city and its surroundings, not only from the air but also from the naval contingent off the North French coast. Whether airborne or sea-launched, bombs and shells rained down on Caen and its surroundings. Earlier on June the 9th, a shell from HMS Rodney had destroyed the bell tower of Caen's St. Pierre Church. It was this latest barrage which practically flattened the city. Charnwood saw the Allies drive the Germans out of northern Caen, and it was seen as a mutually costly tactical success when the result and Allied and German casualties were taken into consideration. The Germans established another defensive line along two ridges to the south of the city. But the momentum was with the Allies, and a week or so later Operation Goodwood would see them finally overcome the German defences and take Caen. From the intelligence at his fingertips, British Commander General Miles Dempsey had some idea about the German strength in and around Caen. There were thought to be in the region of 230 tanks, both Tiger and King Tigers, and around 400 artillery pieces, including the infamous 88s, which had proved so effective as an anti-tank gun against the Allies. Incidentally, we did a podcast all about the 88s back in Season 8, which you can find in the store at the website. Operation Goodwood was not only about taking Caen for the Allies, but also its second objective was to tie up German forces trying to defend Caen so that they couldn't or wouldn't be moved to interfere with US forces advancing as part of Operation Cobra. Once more, an aerial bombardment preceded ground operations for Goodwood. Carried out by 2,000 bombers from the Royal Air Force and the US Air Force, the largest single operation of bombers in the Normandy campaign, a total of 4,800 tons of high-explosive HE bombs were dropped, with the loss of just 25 of the bombers. Following the aerial bombardment, an artillery bombardment ensued from 760 artillery guns, with the availability of almost 300,000 shells set aside solely for Operation Goodwood. Dempsey's tanks moved forward on the 18th behind a creeping barrage laid down by the artillery fire. This was combined with a final aerial bombardment. Engineers had also cleared a number of paths through German-laid mines, with each path around 12 metres in width, enough for an armoured column. Now, while this all sounds clinical and precise, the reality wasn't quite as impressive. The bombing hadn't done the damage that had been hoped. Although the first round of HE bombs had hit a lot of intended targets, such was the volume of the bombs dropped that this had the consequences of causing huge amounts of dust and debris to be thrown into the air, causing the second bombing wave problems in seeing and locating their targets, so that second wave was less useful. Also, the creeping barrage became split into two distinct groups as it advanced at different rates, and the two had no means of communicating with each other. The German officer in command, General Ebenach, saw this as a chance to counter and ordered an attack on the British position by the 1st SS Panzer Division and the 21st Panzer Division, who quickly recaptured lost ground. But the German counter was to no avail, as it was soon neutralised by RAF Typhoons. With the Allies having effective air superiority, the Germans also struggled to replace the material they were losing. If they tried to bring up tanks or repair equipment to replace or mend damaged ones, they were fairly sure to be taken out quickly from the air. Ebenach was faced with a catch-22. If he tried to hold ground, his men and material were sitting ducks from the air. If he tried to counter, then he faced the prospect of losing even more tanks from the Allied ground forces resisting him, thus making his overall ability to recounter next time even worse. And of course, if he withdrew to regroup and consolidate his lines, it only put off the inevitable. On July the 19th, he decided that attack was the best form of defence and started a major counter-attack. While it lasted until the 20th, it failed, and by the end of the day, Caen was under the control of the Allies. The British continued their attack to the east of Caen and captured an extra 7 miles of land previously held by the Germans. In the process, they destroyed a further 100 German tanks. The secondary objective of Goodwood had also been met. The Germans believed that the Allies intended this to be their strongest part of the front, and so German High Command kept 6.5 panzer divisions facing the British and Canadians, while only 1.5 panzer divisions faced the Americans in Operation Cobra. The entire campaign for Caen cost the Allies around 50,000 men. The German losses of men are unknown, though they lost 550 tanks. Part of the campaign was, of course, the Allied bombing of Normandy, including Caen. Eisenhower is reported to have said at one point, "It has taken 7,000 bombs to advance 7 miles." Of course, many, many more bombs than that were dropped. It is estimated that the Allied bombings, both before and after D-Day, cost around the same number of civilian lives, around 50,000. French historian Henri Amoureux suggests that the most deadly Allied bombings under the German occupation were Lisieux, 700 dead, Vire, 400 dead, Caen, approximately 3,000 dead, with only Le Havre suffering more civilian casualties with 5,000 dead. Another French historian, Christophe Prime, wrote, "It was profoundly traumatic for the people of Normandy. Think of the hundreds of tons of bombs destroying entire cities and wiping out families. But the suffering of civilians was for many years masked by an overriding image, that of the French welcoming the liberators with open arms." Of course, war is not a clean thing. It is messy. Atrocities committed by the Germans included 156 Canadian prisoners of war who were shot near Caen by the 12th SS Panzer Division in the days and weeks following D-Day. They were eventually exhumed and buried in the Benny-sur-Mer Canadian War Cemetery. As Operation Goodwood was closing, Operation Cobra was beginning. After a slow start, the offensive would gather momentum and the German resistance would collapse and eventually lead to the Allied victory in the Normandy campaign. If you want to read some eyewitness accounts of the Battle of Caen, then the BBC History website has some great pieces there, covering, among other things, the Allied bombings and some of the German counterattacks. Just search online for BBC History Eyewitness Caen, and you should find it no problem. Now, coming up in a moment is some news on what we'll be looking at in episode 2. But just before that, I mentioned at the start of this podcast that this episode is brought to you by Harrys.com. Harrys were kind enough to sponsor an episode last season, and they're back again sponsoring this one. So thanks to all at Harrys.com for that. They've come up with a great offer for you, our listeners. All you have to do is pop along to Harrys.com, that's HARRYS.com, and use the discount code HISTORY to get a $5 discount off your first purchase. So what is Harrys.com? Well, as you know, one thing about great military men of the time is that they all had great moustaches. Hobart, Alan Brooke, Bernard Montgomery, mentioned in this podcast, Maitland Wilson, Archibald Wavell, they all had them. And to maintain a good moustache, what do you need? You need a good razor. And unlike the aforementioned British officer class, I don't personally sport a moustache, but I do need to scrub up every now and then and have that totally clean-shaven look. And thanks to Harry's, I can have just that, at a fraction of the cost I was paying for the normal off-the-shelf branded products I was buying. We all know that you get a great shave when you use great blades, and Harry's make their own blades. When they found the perfect blade, they actually bought the factory in Germany, and Harry's certainly know a thing or two about blades, as they've been making them since 1920. By making their own blades, they are able to supply them directly to your front door, They cut out the middleman, making them half the price of other branded blades. In fact, they even ship them for free. So if you use the code HISTORY at harrys.com, we can get you $5 off that first purchase. And for just $15, you can get the Truman starter set with razor, blades, and foaming shaving gel. The blades last really well, and in the Truman set you get 3 blade heads, so plenty of shaving there. So the Truman set really is a great starter set to have a go with from harrys.com, just for $15 direct to your door, but you can get it even cheaper by using discount code HISTORY at harrys.com on your first purchase, and you'll get it for an amazingly low $10 direct to your door. They also do other sets like the Winston set for just $25. These just great names for any history buff. Of course, that set, the Winston set, would be just $20 to you as your first purchase if you use history code at harrys.com. From then on, you can have blades delivered at intervals that suit you, whether you need new blades occasionally or more frequently. They have a plan to suit you, so whether you need to spot the everyday clean shave for the officer's mess, or whether you need to let that stubble grow a little to blend in on your undercover ops, harrys.com has just the plan you will need. You'll never be stuck without a fresh razor again. And you can even personalise the sets as a gift by using Harry's engraving service. Perfect. So just go along to harrys.com to find out more about their range of other shaving products as well, and it will really help support us if you go along there and use that code HISTORY to get that $5 discount off your first purchase. Thanks so much. And so coming up in episode 2, we're going to be looking at the Battle of Ramillies. Now you may remember that back in last season we looked at the Battle of Blenheim, where we saw Marlborough victorious. Now Marlborough wanted that momentum to continue, but as was noted by Lieutenant Colonel Frank J. Gerke at the US Army War College, his plan for 1705 envisioned a double thrust into France, with Marlborough leading coalition forces up the Moselle, while the Margrave of Baden attacked through the Lorraine region. Unfortunately, the victory of 1704 had bred only complacency among many of the Allies. Domestic problems soon dominated their agendas. And so it was a year would pass with very little happening until the Battle of Ramillies. So we'll see you in a couple of weeks for that one. Don't forget, we are always on the end of your emails should you wish to drop us a line, info@thehistorynetwork.org, and you can use that address to comment on anything you've heard, or if you have a suggestion of a podcast subject you'd like to hear us cover, or even if you'd like to take that a step further and write a script for us yourself. Do just drop us a line. We do love to hear from you. You can also help us by visiting the store and purchasing some of our previous seasons, which we have there all packaged up as nice chaptered files for download. And it's great as well if you want to interact with us on Twitter or Facebook. Links at the website for those. Thanks again for listening. You've been listening to the HistoryNetwork.org podcast, written and read by Nick Barker. Nick Barker.